The figure on the mountain. In every mythology, every fairy tale, every hero's journey, there appears a figure, the old man who possesses knowledge the hero needs, who appears at crucial moments to offer guidance, who speaks in riddles and paradoxes, who provides the magical sword, or the crucial advice, or the warning that will save the hero's life. He is Merlin guiding Arthur, Gandalf counseling Frodo, Obi-Wan preparing Luke, the hermit in the cave, the sage on the mountain, the elder who has walked the path before and knows its dangers. Carl Jung understood this figure as an archetype, a primordial image living in the collective unconscious, representing wisdom, meaning, the knowledge that comes not from learning but from experience, not from books but from having lived, suffered, grown, and integrated what life has taught. The wise old man is not simply an old person or an intelligent person, but someone who embodies a particular quality of consciousness, a depth of understanding that can only come from having journeyed through life's stages and emerged transformed rather than merely aged. But the archetype has a shadow, a dark side that emerges when wisdom becomes rigidity, when the elder who should guide becomes the tyrant who controls, when knowledge hardens into dogma, when the one who lived becomes the one who prevents others from living. Understanding the psychology of the wise old man means understanding both the genuine wisdom this archetype represents and the dangers that emerge when the archetype possesses rather than serves, when the elder becomes obstacle rather than guide. This is the archetype that lives within us all, waiting to be integrated. The archetype, what the wise old man represents. The wise old man archetype in Jung psychology represents the self in its aspect as guide and teacher, the deeper wisdom that exists beyond ego consciousness, the knowledge that comes not from the conscious mind but from the unconscious, from the accumulated wisdom of human experience across generations. The archetype appears in dreams, in fantasy, in projection onto actual elders who seem to embody qualities we need, pointing toward development that consciousness has not yet achieved. This figure carries what Jung called mana, spiritual power, the numinous quality that makes certain people seem larger than ordinary humans, seem to possess knowledge or capacities that transcend normal understanding. The person touched by the wise old man archetype speaks with authority that comes not from position or credentials but from depth, from having genuinely wrestled with existence and emerged with understanding that feels authentic, tested by life, rather than merely learned from books. The archetype represents several crucial functions in psychological development. First, it provides perspective, the long view that sees individual events within larger patterns, that recognizes that what seems catastrophic in the moment may be necessary passage, that understands that life unfolds in stages, and that each stage has its tasks and its gifts. The wise old man sees the forest where others see only trees, sees the journey where others see only the present difficulty. Second, the archetype carries meaning, helps connect individual experience to larger patterns, to mythological themes, to universal human struggles. The elder who has lived deeply can recognize in the young person's crisis something that echoes across human experience, can say, "You are not alone in this. This is part of the journey. Others have walked this path and emerged transformed." This connection to larger meaning is crucial because it prevents the person from experiencing their suffering as random or meaningless. Third, the archetype provides initiation, marks transitions, recognizes when the person has completed one stage and is ready for the next. In traditional cultures, elders perform this function explicitly through rites of passage, through ceremonies that acknowledge transformation, through transmission of sacred knowledge that could only be given at the right developmental moment. The wise old man knows when to speak and when to remain silent, knows when guidance is needed and when the person must find their own way, knows the difference between helping and interfering. The mentor function, guiding the journey. The most visible manifestation of the wise old man archetype is in the mentor, the elder who guides the younger person through transitions, who provides not answers but questions that lead to discovery, who knows the territory because they have traveled it themselves. The mentor does not live the journey for the mentee, but prepares them for it, equips them with what they will need, warns them of dangers while knowing that warnings alone are insufficient, that some lessons can only be learned through direct experience. The genuine mentor operates from what Jung called individuation, from having done their own psychological work, from having faced their own shadow and integrated it, from having wrestled with their own demons rather than projecting them onto others. This is crucial because the mentor who has not done this work will unconsciously use the mentee to work out their own unresolved conflicts, will live vicariously through the younger person's journey, will give advice that serves the mentor's needs rather than the mentee's development. The mentor's power lies in restraint, in knowing when not to intervene, in allowing the person to struggle and fail and learn from failure. The wise old man in mythology often speaks in riddles, gives advice that seems cryptic or incomplete, provides tools but not instructions for their use. This is not cruelty, but recognition that wisdom cannot be simply transferred from one person to another, like information, that it must be earned through experience, that the journey itself is what creates the capacity to understand what the destination means. The mentor also recognizes developmental stages, understands that what is appropriate guidance at one stage becomes interference at another. The young hero needs the mentor's wisdom and protection, but there comes a moment when the hero must leave the mentor, must go beyond what the mentor can teach, must face the dragon alone. The wise old man who clings to the role past this point, who cannot let go when the time comes, who continues to guide when the person needs to find their own way, becomes obstacle rather than helper. This is the delicate dance of mentorship, being present without being controlling, offering wisdom without demanding it be followed, caring about the person's development without being attached to specific outcomes, knowing when to speak and when to step back. The mentor who masters this dance serves the self rather than the ego, serves the person's genuine development rather than the mentor's need to be needed. Wisdom versus intelligence, what the elder knows. Wisdom is not intelligence, though the two are often confused. Intelligence is the capacity to process information quickly, to solve problems efficiently, to learn and adapt with speed. But a person can be highly intelligent without being wise, can excel at analysis while lacking depth of understanding about how to live, can master complex systems while remaining ignorant about the fundamental questions of existence. Wisdom is something different, something that cannot be acquired through study alone but only through lived experience, through having faced difficulties and learned from them, through having made mistakes and integrated the lessons, through having suffered and emerged, not broken, but deepened. The wise old man represents knowledge that comes from having walked through fire rather than simply having read about it, from having confronted mortality and loss and limitation, and found ways to continue living with meaning despite recognizing life's fundamental difficulties. This wisdom includes paradox in ways that intelligence often cannot. Intelligence seeks clarity, seeks to eliminate contradiction, seeks definitive answers. But wisdom recognizes that life is paradoxical, that truth often exists in tension between opposites, that the deepest insights cannot be reduced to simple formulas. The wise old man can hold contradictions without needing to resolve them prematurely, can say both this and that are true even when they seem to contradict, can recognize that what is right in one situation may be wrong in another. Wisdom also includes humility that intelligence often lacks. The intelligent person may believe they can understand anything through application of reason, but the wise person knows the limits of understanding, knows that some mysteries cannot be penetrated by analysis, that life contains dimensions that exceed rational comprehension. This humility is not ignorance but recognition of the vast territory that lies beyond what can be known, a kind of learned ignorance that Socrates identified when he said, "The wisest person is the one who knows they do not know." The wisdom of the elder also includes acceptance, not passive resignation but active embrace of what cannot be changed, recognition of limits that cannot be overcome, peace with realities that must be endured. This acceptance comes from experience of trying to change what cannot be changed, from having exhausted the alternatives, from having learned through lived experience rather than through abstract reasoning what is possible and what is not, what is worth fighting for, and what must be surrendered to. The shadow, the dark side of the wise old man. Every archetype has a shadow, and the wise old man is no exception. The shadow emerges when the person identifies with the archetype rather than relating to it consciously, when they believe themselves to be the wise old man rather than recognizing themselves as ordinary humans who not sometimes access wisdom. This identification creates what Jung called inflation, the ego swelling with archetypal energy it cannot contain, believing itself to possess powers and knowledge that actually belong to the archetype itself. The inflated wise old man becomes the tyrant, the one who must always be right, who cannot tolerate being questioned, who uses wisdom as weapon rather than as gift. This person quotes philosophy and spiritual teachings, not to illuminate but to dominate, not to guide but to control, not to help others develop but to prove their own superiority. Their wisdom becomes rigid, becomes dogma, becomes the only acceptable truth that others must accept or be condemned. This shadow manifests as the elder who cannot admit ignorance, who must have an answer for everything, who cannot say "I don't know" without experiencing it as intolerable diminishment. The need to be wise becomes more important than actual wisdom. The performance of knowing replaces genuine understanding. The maintenance of the image takes precedence over authentic relating. This person surrounds themselves with followers rather than equals, needs disciples who will not question, creates hierarchies where they are always at the top. The controlling elder also emerges from this shadow, the one who cannot let go, who keeps others dependent, who gives guidance that serves to maintain their own position rather than to help the other person develop autonomy. This elder appears helpful but actually infantilizes, appears to be teaching but actually prevents learning, appears to be guiding but actually keeps the person from finding their own path. The relationship becomes about the elder's need to be needed rather than about the younger person's genuine development. The shadow-wise old man also appears as the bitter elder, the one who has accumulated experience but has not integrated it, who knows much but has become cynical rather than wise, who uses their knowledge of life's difficulties to discourage rather than to prepare, who tells the young that nothing is possible rather than showing them how to navigate what is difficult. This is the elder who has become rigid rather than flexible, who clings to old ways rather than adapting, who sees change as threat rather than as opportunity. False wisdom, the senex who has become rigid. Jung distinguished between the genuine wise old man and what he called the senex, the negative pole of the archetype, the elder who has aged without growing, who has accumulated years without accumulating wisdom, who has become rigid, conservative, opposed to change, hostile to new possibilities. The senex is not wise but is ossified, not deep but is stuck, not mature but is merely old. The senex appears in cultures and institutions as the force that resists innovation, that insists things must be done as they have always been done, that mistakes tradition for truth and precedent for wisdom. This is the elder who says we've always done it this way as if longevity justifies practice, who rejects new ideas not because they are bad but because they are new, who sees change as threat to the order they have spent their lives maintaining. This rigidity often comes from fear, from the elder's recognition that they are nearing the end, that time is running out, that the world they knew is passing away. Rather than accepting this natural progression, rather than supporting the new generation, the senex clings desperately to old forms, tries to freeze time, attempts to prevent the very change that is life's essence. They become what Jung called the terrible father, the one who devours rather than liberates, who keeps the young trapped in old patterns rather than blessing their departure. The senex also manifests as the pedant, the one who has knowledge but no understanding, who can recite facts and theories but has never lived them, who teaches from the head but not from the heart, who offers information but not wisdom. This person has spent their life accumulating credentials and expertise, but has avoided the real work of transformation, has remained protected in ivory towers rather than engaging with life's messiness, has theory without practice, knowledge without integration. The difference between the genuine wise old man and the senex is ultimately the difference between someone who has grown through experience and someone who has merely survived it, between someone who has integrated what life taught them and someone who has defended against the lessons, between someone who has become flexible through wrestling with life's difficulties and someone who has become rigid through refusing to wrestle at all. The senex is the cautionary tale, showing what happens when age comes without wisdom, when years accumulate without growth. Integration, becoming the elder within. The work is not to become the wise old man in the archetypal sense, to identify with the archetype, to believe ourselves to possess ultimate wisdom. The work is to integrate the archetype, to develop our own relationship to wisdom, to become elders in a way that is authentic rather than inflated, that serves rather than dominates, that genuinely emerges from lived experience rather than from performance of wisdom. This integration requires first recognizing that wisdom develops through stages, that it cannot be rushed or faked, that there are no shortcuts to genuine depth. The person who has not faced their shadow cannot guide others to face theirs. The person who has not wrestled with existential questions cannot help others with such wrestling. The person who has not integrated their own wounds cannot help others heal. The elder we become emerges from the life we have actually lived, from the challenges we have genuinely faced, from the integration we have actually achieved. Integration also requires distinguishing between the archetype and the ego, between accessing wisdom and believing we are wisdom. The genuine elder knows that wisdom comes through them rather than from them, that they are instruments rather than sources, that the knowledge they share is discovered rather than owned. This humility prevents inflation, prevents the ego from claiming what belongs to the self, prevents the slide into the shadow forms of the archetype. The inner elder develops through reflection on experience, through extracting meaning from what has been lived, through recognizing patterns across situations, through seeing how the particular connects to the universal. This requires dedicated time for reflection, for processing, for integration. The person who lives but never reflects remains at the level of experience without developing wisdom from it, accumulates years without extracting their lessons, ages without growing. Developing the inner elder also requires willingness to learn from the actual elders who embody genuine wisdom, to seek out those who have walked the path authentically, to apprentice oneself to depth rather than to mere achievement. But this learning is not passive absorption but active engagement, taking what is offered and testing it against one's own experience, integrating what proves true and releasing what does not fit. The genuine elder within knows when to speak and when to remain silent, knows the difference between sharing wisdom and imposing it, knows that teaching often happens through questions rather than answers, through presence rather than words, through embodiment rather than explanation. The elder we become is measured not by how much we know, but by how deeply we have lived, not by the wisdom we claim, but by the transformation we have undergone, not by our years, but by what we have done with those years. This is the integration of the wise old man, becoming genuinely wise through genuine living, developing depth through experience and reflection, serving others from overflow rather than from need, aging into wisdom rather than merely into old age. Conclusion: the psychology of the wise old man reveals that wisdom is not automatic consequence of aging, but is specific development that requires lived experience, reflective integration, and conscious work to extract meaning from what life teaches. The archetype appears across cultures because it represents something essential in human development. The elder who has walked the path and can guide others, the one who has achieved depth and can point toward it, the wisdom that comes from having truly lived rather than simply survived. But the archetype also carries dangers. The shadow emerges when identification replaces relationship, when the ego claims archetypal power, when the elder becomes controlling rather than liberating, when wisdom hardens into rigidity and the one who should guide becomes the one who imprisons. The senex is the cautionary tale, showing what happens when years accumulate without growth, when aging occurs without wisdom, when the elder becomes obstacle rather than helper. Understanding the archetype means recognizing both its genuine gifts and its shadow manifestations, both the mentor who truly guides and the tyrant who controls, both the wisdom that liberates and the dogma that constrains. It means developing discrimination, learning to recognize genuine wisdom versus performance of wisdom, authentic depth versus inflation, the elder who serves the self versus the one who serves only ego. The work of integration is personal and collective. Personally, we must develop our own inner elder, must extract wisdom from our experiences, must age into depth rather than merely into years. This requires reflection, requires facing what we have avoided, requires learning from failures as well as successes, requires becoming flexible rather than rigid, accepting rather than controlling, humble rather than inflated. Collectively, we need genuine elders, need those who have done the work and can guide others, need wisdom that comes from authentic living rather than from theory alone. But we also need to create conditions that allow elders to emerge, that value depth over mere achievement, that create space for reflection and integration, that honor the stages of life rather than treating aging as decline to be resisted. The wise old man archetype points toward a developmental goal, toward the possibility of becoming genuinely wise, of using our years well, of emerging from life's struggles, not broken but deepened, not bitter but understanding, not rigid but flexible, not controlling but liberating. This possibility exists for everyone who lives consciously, who faces challenges authentically, who reflects on experience and integrates what is learned. The elder within is not waiting to be discovered fully formed, but is developing through how we live, through the choices we make, through whether we avoid or engage with life's difficulties, through whether we defend against or integrate what experience teaches. We are all becoming elders of one kind or another, either wise or merely old, either genuine or inflated, either liberating or controlling. The question is which kind of elder we will become. If this exploration of the wise old man archetype has helped you recognize this figure in mythology, in projection onto actual elders, or as potential within yourself, then you have begun to understand this crucial aspect of human development. The elder is not distant archetype, but is emerging in each of us as we age, as we accumulate experience, as we face whether we will grow or merely survive. Subscribe to this channel if you seek content that explores Jungian archetypes with depth and nuance, that honors wisdom traditions while maintaining psychological clarity, that examines both the gifts and shadows of archetypal patterns. Share this with someone who needs to understand what genuine wisdom is, who seeks elders who can truly guide, or who is themselves becoming an elder and needs to understand the psychology of this transition. Leave a comment sharing your experiences with elders who embodied genuine wisdom, with mentors who guided you authentically, with your own process of developing inner wisdom, or with shadow forms you have encountered. This community exists for those interested in depth psychology, in archetypal patterns, in the journey toward genuine wisdom. Remember, you are developing your inner elder whether consciously or not, becoming wise or merely old, integrating experience or defending against it. The archetype of the wise old man points toward possibility of genuine wisdom, of depth earned through living, of becoming someone who can guide others because you have genuinely walked a path. This is available to everyone who lives consciously, reflects deeply, and integrates authentically what life teaches. The elder you are becoming emerges from the life you are living. Choose depth over superficiality, integration over defense, wisdom over mere knowledge, authentic growth over performance of maturity. This is how the wise old man within develops, how genuine wisdom emerges, how we age into something valuable rather than merely into something old.